Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we have back on the show Sandra Inman, and she was on our May 2-hour magic special, if you remember. She's a spiritual mentor and coach and has been practicing Wiccan for 30 years. And she's the founder of Mystery Witch School. Today, she's going to educate us on the Witch's Pyramid. So I'm very excited to hear what she has to say about this foundational principle in magic and witchcraft. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our broadcast. We love having you guys here. We've got some great shows coming up, and next week our good friend Jackie Smith will be back on, and she has just released a new book, The Big Book of Candle Magic, so we're going to be talking about some candle magic. So all you folk that are into Wicca and witchcraft, stay with us because we've got some great stuff coming up with that. We have a group coming up next month from British Columbia that's going to talk about cryptoids, and they do a lot of study on that. That's going to be fascinating. I love the Bigfoot stuff and the Loch Ness Monster stuff, so join us for that and all kinds of great stuff. So check our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. While you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It helps cover our cost a little bit, and we like to keep the show as commercial-free as possible, but it does help the donations now and again, so if you can afford to, great. But the best thing you can do is go to YouTube, click like and subscribe, and that really helps us a lot. So, and thank you to those of you who have subscribed. We love all of you. So I don't want to take up too much time today because this is a big topic, and it's a fascinating one, so looking forward to getting into it. So with that, take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And the group coming in August is Haunted History BC. They're run by, I think there are 3 people, and I'll get the names next week, but 2 of them are women, and they're really a lot of fun too. So I'm really looking forward to that. So welcome, Sandra.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming back. We were so happy to have you the first time, and that special we thought was really good, and people seem to be enjoying it still, actually. So thank you for participating. So let's get started on the topic. Why don't we start with maybe just a broad definition overview of what the Witch's Pyramid is for people that actually don't even know what it is.
It's basically taken from more of an occult point of view of the 4. I can't remember exactly what it's called in relation to the Sphinx, but it's the idea of this is basically how somebody who is a magic worker. These are what we work with. We work with knowledge. We work with our intention or our will. We work with being daring, being people who are courageous and taking steps towards being more autonomous with our lives, and also being very, very careful with our speech and what we say, and also doing a lot of inner work. So for me, the whole thing is really just about understanding what it is to be a magic worker and what we're working with in magic.
Yeah, it's interesting. To tell you the truth, I didn't know until very recently about the connection to the occult magical, ceremonial magical group. I never really knew that at all, even though I've been involved in witchcraft and magic. And I came across that same idea to the 4 powers of the Sphinx, which almost sounds cooler.
Yeah. And that's what I always knew it as. I only probably over the last maybe 10 years became acquainted with the term the Witch's Pyramid, because we'd never referred to it as the Witch's Pyramid at all in any of the covens that I was in, like back in the 90s. It was always the powers of the Sphinx. So it was a new term, the Witch's Pyramid.
Interesting that you learned that right away, because I came in later than you, late, I think, where I first heard the word witch's pyramid was one of Ravenwolf's books, had it listed as that. And that was more, sort of 90s, late 90s. The one I read, I think, that I bought it. Maybe it was written before that, but you're right. It sounds like it came in sort of later. So, so I know that people break it down differently based on what I can tell, but let's maybe make it sort of simple to start with, and we'll go wherever we want with the conversation. So, with the idea of sort of the four sort of statements that are often seen about the pyramid: to know, to will, to dare, and to either keep silent or be silent. That one seems to have a lot of different ways of saying it. Let's just start for a starting place at to know. What are your thoughts about it means magically to know? What does it include? And also, I'd like to hear your own experiences of working with these.
When it comes to know, it's about, on one hand, it's about knowledge, so the simple intellectual knowledge. So we usually start there. We start with that more heady understanding through the reading, maybe through being taught, but it's more the heady knowledge. It's this is the what aspect, and also learning the how, but more on that, on one hand, it's more in that heady sense of, yes, I know this, I've read this, I know how to do this. But on another level, the to know is also coming from the gnosis of your own experience and what you've learned on the path of doing it as well. So to me, there's like two ways. There's that inner knowing, or the gnosis, that you get from experience, which is the real knowledge. And then there's the knowledge that you may get from other people or from books that you could just sit with and be like an armchair witch or an armchair occultist and be able to rattle off these things, but never having practiced it, you don't really get the knowledge. You don't get the gnosis. So it's a sort of a two-part thing for me. It's both that heady understanding, and then through the practice, you get the deeper knowledge.
I love that. And I totally agree that they're tied together. And I mean, on the surface, you could go initially with, oh, it's about knowledge and learning, something from a teacher, from a book. But you're right, it's nothing if you don't integrate it through experience, and it becomes that gnosis, like you said. And so sometimes it's better to start with just something really simple so that you can get going on the path and have some experiences that will lead you further.
Absolutely. And that's why I teach the way that I do. It's very slow the way I teach. And it's deliberate, because you can get the knowledge from anywhere in regards to the head knowledge. It's all over the internet. It's in all the books. You don't need to really go too far to find the theory. But when it comes to the practice, people don't know how to practice. They don't know how to take the knowledge that they're reading into the gnosis side through practice, because it's not something you can really communicate in a book. It's something you've got to usually work with a teacher or work with somebody, and then put it into practice and experience it for yourself. And that gives you the real knowledge then. It's only through experience that you have the knowledge.
I totally agree. And I know that the world has changed because of the pandemic with teaching online. And I agree with that theoretically for a lot of things, but I still feel like some in-person teaching is usually necessary for certain aspects of magic to be, like you said. Even I remember like reading about casting a circle. And I know that sounds really simple, but I remember like being a little confused about it. And finally I said, okay, I'm just going to do it, because I had no other choice. And I had Michael too, but I just remember feeling like I was making something maybe harder than it really was, because I was like, well, what if I can't visualize this energy? And, and what if my apartment, I can't put an altar in the east or wherever it was, north, I think. And I was, because I was a little shaky in the beginning, it would have been nice to have someone, hey, don't do this, or this is good, or don't worry about this. And then I might have gone a little faster in a sense,
Yeah, exactly. When I first started, of course, I learned from a book as well, because this was back in the early 90s. There wasn't an internet. And yeah, I think it was Scott Cunningham's book actually, and then later Raymond Buckland's Big Blue Book. And I just basically did what was in the book and, tried it all out. I didn't hesitate. I wasn't particularly concerned whether I was doing it right or not. I guess because I had the space where I could put the altar in the right place according to the book, which is actually the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just basically followed the directions in the book and learned from that until I found the coven and actually had people who could help me.
So now these days, you're right that things are really available online, but at the same time, when you think about learning, like, let's say I'm a complete beginner, I really don't know anything about magic, and it can be a little overwhelming to find maybe the basics to start with, the knowledge, and maybe not confuse yourself by trying different, for instance, different paths, have some different emphasis. And so, I mean, what kind of advice would you sort of give overall for someone that was just beginning and trying to figure out maybe a basic path to follow and not be overwhelmed by all the information?
I'd have to find out exactly what they're interested in, like what are they resonating with, why are they wanting to walk the path, because it's sort of different for each person's reasons for doing it. Everyone's got a different reason. And often we come to the path for the wrong reasons. And then we learn the true nature of the path and then what it's really about. So it depends on the person. But I always say that if it comes to anything to do with Wicca or witchcraft that's got a very strong Wiccan influence, I just go back to the real basics of people like Scott Cunningham and Raymond Buckland, the oldies, the ones who just made it very simple. And I know that there's a lot of criticism out there of Scott Cunningham and Raymond Buckland, but that's, I guess, where I came in, and I found that they were just very easy to work with. And you want to keep it simple. You don't want it to be complicated. And yes, they are very simple, particularly Scott Cunningham's work, very simple.
Yeah.
But that's where you've got to start. You've got to start really, really simple. So if you want to find out more about it, I think that, that's a good source to go to. He was closer to the more traditional ways of working anyway. So, yeah, that's where I'd start. That's where I go. Scott Cunningham.
Well, I think all those earlier authors in our time, because there's even some more that are earlier, they were really important because people forget that there wasn't the internet then, and it was a lot more scary to put things out as a witch, at that point, and it still is in some areas. And so interesting. I've been going back now more, and I went and reread or read some more of Doreen Valente's books because I love her poetry, and I really, really liked what she had to say about a lot of things. And I thought, wow, she really was the real deal. Like, even if you don't agree with some of, I get the impression from some of those early authors, because it wasn't so popular, they really were practitioners. There was no doubt that Scott Cunningham was a practitioner and Doreen Valente whereas sometimes, because, well, there's money in it, so and it's faddish to be a witch now. It's kind of a fad. So, people will do things for fads too. No judgment about it, but it's just the truth.
Well, those early authors, I know, they didn't make a hell of a lot of money. Definitely didn't make it from their writing. So it was really for the love of it and for the fact that that's what they were doing. Yes, they were real practitioners. And there's something that resonates about their writings. I haven't read a whole lot of modern practitioners' works. There's a lot out there, but I haven't read them all because I don't feel the need to read a lot of beginners' books over and over and over again.
Exactly.
Excuse me. But it's, I don't know, there's just something that was quite genuine about their writing, and that's the era I started in. So, yes.
Yeah. No, and I think I mean, I would be in agreement with you. To start simple does seem to be, again, this is a general thing. There's always going to be people that like to do deep dives, and that's their personality. And you kind of mentioned that idea that, follow your interests. And so in a sense, part of to know is to know yourself, in the sense, like, what is it? Who am I? And where do I want to go with this? Like you said, your intentions, everyone has different intentions. And so that can be kind of included in that kind of idea of to know. And that might help a person, pick their books or teachers or methods.
Yeah. And I even if you do want to go deeper and you do want to know more, you're not really going to excel on the path until you actually put that knowledge into practice. And that's something you've got to have time for, and you make time for. And it's not as fast. It's easier to get knowledge from a book. You could read a book and get a whole lot of knowledge in an hour of sitting there reading. But when you actually try to put that into practice, it could take a much longer to really get the gnosis from actually practicing. That's why people won't practice, because it takes too long to get results.
Absolutely. No, and I agree with the element of maybe that there needs to be something about patience in one of these 4 ideas.
That's true, yes. Be patient could be the 6th one. I guess if you're going to include Crowley's to go, you could have the 6th one of be patient.
Be patient, it takes a while, even if you have beginner's luck and do something amazing right away. So let's go on to the next idea. And I'm just, I know this can be in different order. I'm just doing it randomly. And the idea of to will something. And I remember also somebody saying it's like an intention too. That was one definition. But how do you see that in magic?
Intention, will. Again, yeah, it is intention. And it's your desire, it's what you want, putting your will out there. It's interesting, the word will, because you've got the ego will, and then you've got kind of the idea of the higher will. And I guess for magic, most of the time we're putting our ego will out there in the world. But it's the higher will, often our true beliefs, that actually end up manifesting, or our true beliefs are often what may even impede the manifesting. So it is about putting your intention out there. But when it comes to practicing and becoming, I guess, better at what you're doing, the will is actually having the willpower to actually take the time to practice. Take the time every day, do your daily practice, do your learning, do your study, do your journaling, do all of that. That requires willpower. So that requires will as well. So it's not just throwing your intentions out there and commanding the universe to do what you will. It's also about learning to have self-discipline and responsibility for your own work, and having your own willpower to be able to stick at something, do something, even if you don't want to that day, even if you don't feel like doing it that day, making time to do it, getting up extra early in the morning to do a practice. That requires will too.
That's a really good point. And, the topic of will in the occult world is probably a lot more complex than most people realize. I have a book at home. The whole book is The Power of the Will, which I keep meaning to read the whole thing. And it's written from some occult guy, right? And it just fascinated me that there was a whole book on it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to read it someday. But then also what I wanted to talk about was the idea that it seems like some people, and quite a few people, their wills are damaged in various ways. And in that, like I agree with you, there's like the higher will and then the ego will. But what if you have a damaged will based on a religion telling you can't have certain things or be a certain person or a teacher? Would this be an opportunity to then work on healing the will in order to have a powerful use of the will?
Absolutely. It's about healing and reprogramming what you've been taught. And that's part of the inner work. That's part of the shadow work, to heal those parts of yourself that don't believe that you deserve it, or that you should, you're not allowed. Often you'll get, God doesn't want me to have that, or God doesn't want me to do this. And even people who are Wiccans or pagans, if they're growing up in a religious tradition that has been maybe one of more traditional religions, where even when you go over to being a Wiccan or a pagan, that subconscious program about God not wanting me to do this or do that, or I'm not allowed, can still be playing in the subconscious mind. And that can impede your magic 100%. So that's where the shadow work comes in. And that's where the EFT and the tapping comes in. It helps reprogram the brain to realize that, what if I am allowed? What if the divine does want me to have, a successful relationship? Or what if the divine does want me to be prosperous financially? We've got to change those programs.
Absolutely. I came across just by chance the other day an article by this man, Jason Mankey, and he quotes Levi's quote about the witch's pyramid, where it came from. And in the will part, he said, a will which cannot be broken. And that was really interesting to me. And I think theoretically, I agree with him, because a crushed will, I used to volunteer for a domestic violence shelter. And one of the issues with, once you've been sort of broken, the training was that if the women want to go back, and in this case it was women, though I know men can be also abused, but in this case it was women, you couldn't stop them, because they had to rebuild their will, and they had to learn to be able to say, I don't want to go back. And I remember what a powerful lesson that was, to have to know that I might meet a woman that will go back into that situation because their will has not been healed. And so it really stayed with me for so long. It was a very dramatic version of a broken will.
Yes, and that's exactly how narcissistic relationships are. They try to crush your will. And whether that's an organization or whether that's a one-on-one relationship, that's what happens. They crush the person's will, or the person allows their will to be crushed. Or they've probably already come into the situation with a crushed will from their upbringing. That's usually what happens. And yeah, it just gets crushed more and more, definitely. But again, that comes back to having to do the shadow work and having to then go and heal those wounds, generally from childhood, that have caused the will to get crushed in the first place.
I have a quick question for Sandra. And I know it's going to drag us off topic a little bit, but you did mention the tapping, and that's a concept magically that honestly I hadn't been that familiar with or heard before, and I know that she's done some videos on it. So can she perhaps explain just in a quick nutshell what tapping is? Because it's something that I was not at all familiar with magically.
So what EFT is, or emotional freedom technique, is it uses the Chinese meridian system, so the qi and the flow of the qi, to be able to release beliefs and emotions connected to maybe memories and connected to beliefs. So by gently tapping on various acupressure points and talking about what you're feeling, what you believe, it kind of creates this, it calms the nervous system. So we know that for a fact because that's been studied. And when the nervous system starts to calm down, it takes you into a slight trance state. And that's when you can start to communicate with your subconscious mind and change the programs. And what EFT does is it allows you to really connect to your subconscious mind and speak its language, because you can use all sorts of different methods of working with EFT, like imagery. You can work with the body. You can do a lot of Gestalt stuff with it. There's so many different ways things you can use with tapping that helps you access your subconscious mind, access the beliefs and the programs and memories that have caused these. And then through tapping on it and working through it, you actually release that mind-body connection. It's like you interrupt the continuous cycle between thought, emotion, thought, emotion, thought, emotion, and then you end up changing the emotional reaction to the event, and you actually end up changing the thought. And it works through it works basically by allowing your qi to flow and getting you into that trance state.
That was a good question. That was really a great explanation. Now, so is it based then on the Chinese idea of the meridians, where they are in the body?
Not so much where they are or which ones they are. It's more to do with any of the meridians that will work with EFT. So it's not like you've got to use the kidney meridians or you've got to use the stomach, even though they're used in the tapping. It's more that if you tap on a meridian point, it actually helps connect you to your subconscious and gets the energy going.
Yeah, and that's a really great thing to talk about, the idea of using the body and mind together for magic, and for not just for separating them, like I need to go do my healing work, and I think that at least it seems like a lot of witches, since they're very interested in nature and the body, that this would be a very natural interest for anyone that's interested in witchcraft.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's part of the energy healing. They call it energy psychology, because you're working with the energy system and you're doing that inner deep dive work, which should be a part of anyone who's on the magical path sort of training program or work, because we can't really do anything useful in the outside world or really have the outer world working for us if our inner world isn't working for us. We've got to start with the inner world. It's actually where the rubber meets the road. It's actually where the magic really begins. It is the crux of everything, our inner work. It's the most important work we'll ever do. And to think that we can just do magic and put our will out into the world without having done that inner work and having that healthy will, that sense of self, that strong will again, you don't get the results you want to get. You don't get the happiness and the joy unless you've done that inner work.
And one of the things I've also noticed on sort of popular sort of witch videos is talking about shadow work. I find people are a little flip about it. They because for me, I mean, I'm 62 and I've gone in and out of working on shadow work. And first of all, it's very nebulous work in my mind. And some of us, almost everyone has a spiral, a pattern that repeats throughout life and that we just go deeper with understanding. And sometimes I feel like people, the way they even talk about shadow work is a little, like I said, almost flip. And not that we have to be in shadow work doesn't always mean you have to be in pain either. So, no. I mean, that's not, it's a shadow. It's in the shadow. I can have really good traits in the shadow that I'm not using.
Yes, so you can have a light, we call the light shadow and the dark shadow. And the light shadow can be all of these wonderful aspects that you do have and abilities that you do have, but you're not allowing yourself to express because you don't feel there's beliefs there that are telling you that you don't deserve it or that other people, usually you're going to offend other people. So you may have brilliant things that you want to do, that you can do, but shame might be holding you back from it. So that's an aspect of shadow work too. Finding your brilliance is part of your shadow work. Tapping into your brilliance is part of shadow work. It's all part of that. But I think the problem is a lot of people who talk about it don't really understand it because they haven't had the life experience or they haven't really had any kind of training in it either. Well, at least with the EFT and the hypnotherapy, you get that sort of training and you start to understand more about it from actually doing it too.
Absolutely. I like the term in the Jungian psychology called the light one, the golden shadow. And it's so perfect, and I remember coming across that word. I was reading some Jungian book and it wasn't Jung, it was someone talking about him. And I said, what a great idea, the golden shadow, like that sun, like just there in the shadows trying to come out. And this particular book, they said that can be a lot harder to get out than even the darker shadow. And I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Absolutely. And it's about accepting, it's about self-acceptance because we've all got the shadow. Every single human being on this planet shares all of the shadow qualities. Some more so than others, but we all share them. And it's not about trying to stop ourselves from having the shadow. It is about us understanding where it's coming from and why it's there. And when it comes to what we would, I guess, consider the negative aspects of the shadow, that all comes from our ego's need to survive and feel safe. So once we understand that that's just the ego wanting to feel safe, it makes it a lot easier to understand why we may react negatively to some things or have certain negative beliefs about people, situations, or whatever. And it brings us a sense of understanding of ourselves, which then helps us understand other people as well. And it's about learning to forgive ourselves for that. And it makes it easier then for us to forgive and not judge and criticize other people. But all of these other good things, we're also holding ourselves back from expressing because we feel generally shame or we're people pleasing. We feel that if we do step into our brilliance, who's going to get upset? Who are we going to offend? Generally, that's a big one. Right. And we've got this ceiling. It's like a ceiling with inner work. You reach a ceiling and there's a certain point where you just can't push through that ceiling. And you feel a sense of resistance or a backlash. And it usually comes to the point where you'll go, if I make these changes and I step into who I know I am, who will I be? And there's generally a huge fear around who will I be, because people are afraid that they're going to turn into maybe somebody who's very arrogant or a bad person, or that they're going to lose family or friends because it's going to upset the dynamic that they've got set up with those people. So it's not easy work.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I was thinking, what was I was thinking about the whole to will? Oh, the idea of the shadow work and that how this is, we're talking about this under the will, which is interesting. And because in a way, what in my own experience, if my will is weak, that's when it's easier for everything I do to collapse. And even though I've been I was super disciplined spiritually in my 20s. I mean, I'd come home and I'd do practices for an hour till midnight. But I've had, just like everybody else, my share of hits, and the will is such a key for me to continue whatever the work is, even if it's the work is to take a break. But that's different from like allowing yourself to just kind of collapse and feel hopeless about this isn't working or whatever it is that people feel. And I think it's a key for me personally, that will, to keep that healthy somehow. And don't you think there's little ways, little ways, let's say my will is weak, there are small ways people can rebuild it. And what would you suggest as far as, let's say I know my will is there, but it's sort of, not quite strong enough for me to do some of the things. But how can I rebuild it in a way, like a day-to-day way that's really maybe practical?
Get familiar with what's holding you back. What are the beliefs? What are you telling yourself? When you go to maybe think about doing a practice, even if it's just going and doing some meditation or maybe doing a spell, what are you telling yourself? Write down what you're saying, what is going on inside your head. Like, what are you telling yourself? Oh, I don't have time. Oh, what if I make a mistake? Oh, what if this is successful? Then what will happen? Or what if I fail? Write down the beliefs. Get familiar with what you're telling yourself, because that's what's stopping you. That's what's holding the will back. So just journal. Start with journaling. Get familiar with what your program is, and then you can start to find ways of changing it.
That's a great idea. And that whole inner dialogue, you're right, is really important to notice it and see what's going on there and sort of objectively say, well, what are the beliefs? And that is something someone could do pretty much right away.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even if you've got the belief that you're too scared to find out what your beliefs are, or write that down. In EFT, we even start tapping on the resistance to actually tapping. And some people have that resistance to actually even starting. I don't want to tap. So you tap on that. So wherever you're at, write it down. Write what you're saying to yourself. Because you've got to know what you're telling yourself in order to be able to make any change in your life whatsoever.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. So let's go on to the next idea that I just, again, randomly have. It's to dare. And I love that. That word dare is such a good word.
Yes, be daring. But be daring to work on your will. Be daring to do the inner work. Be daring to try the magic. Be daring to try something, even if you're scared you're going to fail. Be daring to try it, even if you're scared of the success. You have to have the courage to do this work. Otherwise, you can't do it. You've got to be willing to go places you've never been to before. So it's about courage and daring to step into your power, to step into who you are, to step into your brilliance. You've got to have that, because if you don't have that, then you're probably not going to get very far at all.
For me, I like the word dare because it seems to imply adventure. That and for me, magic itself, no matter what, has always been some kind of an adventure. And with, whether it's an inner, outer, both, and having that sort of adventuresome spirit has always helped me.
Yes, absolutely, definitely an adventure. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, and being willing to learn from your experiences, to learn from your mistakes, and not beat yourself up about your mistakes. Our education system teaches us to always want to be perfect all the time, and we have to learn that we're probably going to fail more times than we succeed often on the path. So being able to be brave enough to be able to learn from our mistakes as well.
And that's where it could be helpful to have some sort of a diary or journal or magical, well, the Western cult would call it a magical diary, to write down what's going on when you do the magic and just objectively see what happens. And I don't do it consistently, but when I have done it and I've looked back in the past, I was really glad I did it, even though it was something very minor. I didn't think it was it wasn't a big spell or anything. But it was useful later for me to see what happened and to read about it.
Yeah, definitely. Because you'll forget these things otherwise. And when you look back, you'll see how the magic worked and how it probably worked in a way that you totally didn't expect it to work.
It's true. And we talked about that before the show, too. Some of the aspect of magic, not trying to control the timing or how it's going to happen, and the importance of that.
Yeah, because I know that some people like to get precise about timing, and they'll say that if you put a timing on your magic and it doesn't work in that time, that it's failed. I don't find magic necessarily to work with the timing that you would think it should work in. It works in the timing that it works in. But often you'll find that, particularly if something's dire, that it works just at the last minute. It's like the 11th hour is when it will kick in and work a lot of the time. When it's something that may be urgent, that's what I've found has always been surprising. And it's worked in ways that are quite surprising, but it's worked at like the 11th hour, not straight away. And you do have to give it its time to work. It's going to take its time. And the universe has got to line everything up. So some things may take longer to line up. If you're doing love magic and the person that is right for you according to your spell is halfway around the world, and they've got to have a reason to come and meet you or in time to do that. So, or you've got to have things in place for everything to line up too, because you're also dealing with other people and situations and influences as well, and that's all going to line up.
That's a really good point of bringing up the idea of the spell itself, and also certain spells involve others, where something might be I'm working on myself, and when it involves other, we don't want to interrupt their will either.
Yeah, and so it's got to line up. Their will has to line up with your will.
That was what I was going to talk about in the will. I'm going to go back to that a second. That idea that sometimes I think maybe it's portrayed because of movies, overpowering people with will, even if it's like a good intention, like, that I'm going to have so much magic, I can do this and overpower your will. And seems to me that could be ineffective, even dangerous, depending on the other person's will.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that when it comes to people trying to manipulate or influence people, most magicians tend to do it more through mentalism, or more through manipulating somebody on a psychological level, more so than on a magical level. So it depends on the other person's will too, and what their energy is like and how they're vibrating. I find that magic tends to vibrate at similar levels. So if you've got somebody who's vibrating in a much higher level, and you've got somebody who's trying to manipulate them who's at a lower level, they're probably not going to have a lot of success.
That's a really good point.
They've got to bring that person down to their level in order to be able to be manipulated.
Going back to the point about using more psychology and mentalism, that's a really good point. I think that you're probably right about that when I think about some of the examples I can come to mind. And then also it does seem like different traditions of magic allow a little more in the sense that they feel okay with it. And I feel for me, I just have to feel okay with that belief. And if I'm not, then it's not the right kind of magic for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've also got to look at the psychological implications of why do you want to manipulate somebody else that way? What's going on inside yourself? What work have not you done on yourself to feel that you have to do that to somebody else in order for you to achieve the joy and happiness and success of whatever it is that you're wanting? Because if you have done the inner work, you find it's less and less necessary to have to control the outside world, because the outside world just starts to flow with what you want, because you're more in sync with your higher self and you're more in sync and connected. So the more work you do on yourself, the more happiness and joy and peace that you have within yourself, the less need you have to manipulate anyone or anything. And that's why the inner work's so important. And that's why the mystics teach the inner work and don't teach magic. They won't teach magic in the East.
Right.
If you go to a Sufi school or a Buddhist school, they will not touch magic. It's all the inner work first.
Yeah.
Because they know that if they teach magic first, people are just going to run crazy with it and end up hurting themselves as a result. So the inner work's done first in the Eastern schools.
Absolutely. I remember the reading too, and also because I had some training in Buddhism, it's like a byproduct is how they view it, and that's how they teach it. Like, don't worry about it. It's just a byproduct of once you get to these states. And then I did recently read something where it was saying, well, these byproducts can be of help sometimes, and they talked about really good examples of why you might want to use, telepathy, or why you might. And again, it was very modest, and it was all about helping other people and not taking you, like you said, away from the inner work. And you're absolutely right. From everything I was taught too, it was all about the inner work in the Eastern schools. Yeah.
Yeah. And even though I'd had some rebellion against that when I was younger, as I get older and I guess have practiced the inner work more and have more experience of having done the inner work, I understand where they're coming from and why the inner work is really the place to be. It does make a huge difference. You can't argue that. If you've done the inner work, you know that it is where the real magic is.
It's true. I think I went through something a little bit similar too with sort of the I didn't have a lot of rebellion. Just in my early 30s, I decided, well, I'm just going to go straight to a psychic workshop. But I'd had a lot of training. So before that, and I think the training really set in the long run, like in terms of that being my emphasis, because I've always gone back to the inner work being the main principle. And the other thing I wanted to add when you were talking about you don't have to manipulate the universe, what I have found too is that when we let go of how something's going to happen, there can be solutions we never dreamed of, because there's no doubt the universe is way more creative than just me and what I think can happen. And I've been shown things like, wow, that worked out in a way I never would have thought of, and I love it, And I think that's
the magic.
Yeah, that's the magic.
The magic of magic.
The magic of magic. It's kind of humbling, I think, just when because you might think, well, I have this way that's going to be great. And then the universe says, well, how about this? And you're like, oh.
Exactly. And it usually works out better.
Yes, it does. That you're absolutely right. It does if we learn to let go and so to see what happens. And you're right. I think it feels better for me anyway, I can say. It feels better when I'm doing things more in the flow with the universe than if I'm trying to force it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something I think we have to learn, because we're taught that, and this is also, I guess, the influence of Hollywood and the whole idea of magic from a mainstream point of view, that it's something you have to have special powers and you can manipulate and do whatever you want as a result of having these magic powers, and so people start to think that that's what magic really is, but it's not like that at all. I have people emailing me wanting to get magic powers, and how do they get magic powers? Yeah, people still believe that.
Well, the fact is, I was out recently on the boardwalk, and there was this fellow, and I think he might have been homeless, and had this little speech he was giving about everybody was already a winner. He said, "You're all winners. You're already winner. You were born. You beat them out. You're a winner already." And I was like, I started listening. He said a lot more stuff, and it was really good, actually. And I went up and I said, "Hey, I agree. I appreciate what you're saying." He's like, "Yeah, thanks a lot, you know." And I mean, life is the biggest magic of it all, that you're here.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So now let's get on to the next one, because that one is a very interesting, the mysterious sounding one. I've heard it said to be silent or something similar to that, but basically it's around the concept of silence in some capacity, and that certainly has a lot of room for interpretation.
It does. The most common interpretation I've heard is that to not tell anybody, basically, about your magic. So if you've done any spell work or magical work, don't tell anyone, because their influence may influence you, and that can influence your magic. And while there's certainly an element of truth to that, if you do tell people what you're doing and people may reinforce those negative programs that you may already have, then yes, that can influence your magic. But it goes beyond that. For me, that to keep silent is to be discerning about what you say and who you say things to. Some people just aren't ready to hear things or know things. So it's better to not say something. And if telling people what you're doing, as you know, is going to cause a problem, then yes, don't tell them. But then there's other schools of thought that say that, you know, if you do tell people what your plans are, then it's more likely to manifest, because you're going to feel more compelled to take action. For me, that's definitely an aspect of it, but more than anything, the silence is about the inner silence. It's about stopping that monkey mind. It's about taking time out to meditate. It's stepping back and being able to be more the observer of your life, rather than being manipulated by what's going on emotionally. So that meditation aspect and that inner silence is really what I feel to be silent is more about.
I really love what you said, the word discernment, because that to me could be a key to deciding when to speak about something and when not to. And then you have much more of a middle way view of it, so that times you may think, well, this one really feels like I really want to keep it silent for whatever reason, or no, I feel the need to tell this one person. Somehow I feel that, it's important. So that I thought was really a very good word to include in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it just depends. It depends on you. It depends on your programs. It depends on who your people are around you. And even with the cult knowledge, even with the knowledge of magic, you don't want to go around telling everybody about it, because not everybody's ready to hear it. You can actually do more harm.
And then I suppose, you could also take it as, depending on the time and where you lived at the time, since this goes back to Levi's day, that it could be dangerous to be a magician or a witch, and that it has that element even in certain cultures today. It seems like there are still very dangerous places for people practicing witches, because they'll kill them. There's still
Absolutely.
witch hunts in today. So that's what I like about it. It has definitely that layer, and obviously I think because of your emphasis on the internal work, and I agree with it, that the silent part is certainly connected to the inner silence, and going within to learn how to sit with that and hear what is told to you within that silence.
And not to run the risk of getting too cocky, I guess, as well, and talking about it, because I guess in the sense of where it can be dangerous for people to know that you practice, sometimes the ego can want to skite about what it's able to do and how you're able to do it. And that can get you into a lot of hot water if you're in certain environments where people are going to fear you because you're practicing magic. And that still happens. There's places, even in Western culture, where you don't want to be telling people what you're doing.
That's funny. I was reading in this book by, it's Lee DeAngelis, and he called the witches pyramid the Hermetic Quaternary. And he said this great line. He says, remember, never boast and never threaten. And I just laughed because I definitely hear a fair amount of that on Instagram, both of them boasting and threatening people, like, if you do this, I'm going to come after you. And I thought, uh-oh, I think you're just setting yourself up for a magical war.
That's just the ego getting caught up in things. And, yeah. So as people often come to this path for the wrong reasons.
I think so too. But I just thought it was a funny combination. And to your point about, getting cocky, I remember there's this book called Mastery by Robert Greene, and it's a great book on sort of like the concept of what it takes to master anything. And there's a whole section on social intelligence. And one of the things he advises is to stay kind of low key about your accomplishments until you're more untouchable. Because jealousy, he said, can really get in your way, and you can avoid it by being kind of humble and low key until, you get to a point where you feel like it doesn't really matter what they do or say. And I remember thinking, like, that's a good strategy. I never thought of it as a strategy, but it's more, rather than a morality, he was using it more as a strategy for being intelligent socially.
And a lot of that morality is generally practical. Like, if you look at a lot of the morality in the mystical traditions, it's not because it's good or bad to do what it is that you're doing or not doing. It's because it's got a practical outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's what he was saying too.
To do that, because this can happen. It's always practical.
Yeah. No, it is. I thought that's what he was sort of saying too, to make your life easier. Why don't you do this? And I thought, okay, I agree with that, because you're not going to be, rubbing it up against other people's egos that way too. And it'll save you time and energy.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that that we were talking earlier too, that Michael had some interesting thoughts about the whole to be silent. Did you want to add it here, Michael?
Yeah, and to me, again, the silence, and I think Sandra said it as well, that inner silence. And to me, that's also that inner trust, that inner faith that your magic will work, having that quiet confidence and belief. And so, and again, I see people that, they do a working or a spell, and then, they're frantically trying to check in on it and see how it's doing, or maybe I need to redo it. And they just don't seem to be able to sit with things. And I think being able to sit with your magic is kind of a big element of to be silent. And just, again, that quiet inner confidence, as Sandra said, and that quietness and stillness inside too. As I was just saying to somebody in our chat, you trust your magic, you let it be and you let it work. And so I think some people really, really struggle with that.
Yeah, the receptive side of it, that surrender, let it go. So once you've done your magic, you've got to let it go, and you've got to surrender to the outcome and be open to receiving the outcome. That's when that active aspect is done. It's now time to receive and take the physical action in the physical world that you're guided to take through the magic. That's, I guess, where the to-go aspect comes from, which is what Crowley added, where you've got to take physical action in order to help the magic actually come into the physical world. Sometimes you don't have to take action. Sometimes things will just turn up. That's rare. Generally, you do have to take some kind of action.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't know about that to-go part, so that's really fascinating. I know that some people like to combine the 4 elements, and to-go is, I think, the spirit or something, but I really didn't know about that till recently too. The idea of where it's going to go, and that could have all kinds of implications, the actual statement.
Yeah. I think initially it was meant to be, you've got to take action. Because a lot of people forget that aspect. They just think that, they're going to open their mouth and a roast chicken or something's going to fly in there. That's a Gurdjieff statement. But you do have to take action because we're in the physical world, and often the magic can't flow until you take a particular action, because you're influencing yourself too when you do magic. So it's not the case, I'm just going to sit here and, this perfect person's going to come to my door if I've done love magic. No, you've got to actually go out there and socialize and meet people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The only way they're going to come there, most likely. I mean, it does happen. I know that it happened in the case of, I think it was the Scientology guy, but that's very rare. You've got to go to those places and have it in your sphere of availability, and do the things that you need to do to help it come. And you'll be guided as to where to go and what to do. If you are doing money magic, then you'll be guided as to, you know, what you may need to do to help bring that money in. You might get an idea for a business or a side business, or you might get an idea to sell something. You've got to do something.
Yeah, Crowley uses an example in his book on magic and theory and practice when you're talking about actually doing something physically. And he, I think, if I recall, he uses the example of having your pocket watch stolen. So you're doing a magical working to try and get your pocket watch back that was stolen. And he said, you want to do a working where you first summon the angels of justice. And he said, and by that I mean call the police, you know. so I thought that was very funny. But it's true. It's you know, the physical action is part of it. And I think too many people think that I can just do a magical spell and then, you know, the universe will do all the work. But you do have to kind of cooperate sometimes too. And I always tell people, again, I say magic and tarot readings, all these things are supposed to enhance your effort, not replace your effort.
Exactly. And that's the problem too I get with people who always looking for, like, they're either looking for me to cast a spell for them or give them spell advice. And it's like, yeah, I can give you advice. You know, I'm not going to cast for you because I don't know what your psychological makeup's all about. I don't know what you believe or what you don't believe, and how you're going to possibly sabotage yourself by not taking the right actions.
Right.
And that's the whole thing about it. We can sabotage our magic simply by not taking the action.
Now, speaking of advice, I did want to let people know that you have a school. MysteryWitchSchool.com is your website, and I think it's called Mystical Witch School on YouTube. You have a YouTube, but I think that I didn't know if maybe that other name was taken or what, but that you teach. And you've been studying and working magic for years and years. And so anyone interested in what Sandra has to say, I did want to put a pitch out there that she has a Mystery Witch School.
Yes, so the Mystery Witch School is basically where I do all my teaching. And I've got 2 courses. One is the Mystery Witch School 101, which is about probably the first year of training for beginners in Wicca and witchcraft. So it's not traditional Wicca, it's still a Wiccan form, but I'm pretty eclectic, so I still teach within that form. So that is for people who don't know where to start, or they've got the knowledge but they just don't know how to practice, because it's really about this is getting in and actually practicing it. This is how you practice, and having that coaching along the way. So it's a group training. It's self-paced. We do get together twice a month over Zoom and do new moon and full moon over Zoom and any Q&As for that. And so that's a 12-month program. And then I've got another course, which is Wheels of Empowerment. It's new. It's where I'm working with the shadow work and the chakras. And I found with a bit of tapping as well as some ritual work in there, and a little bit of hypnotherapy, meditations to help basically healing the shadow through the chakras. So that's what I do at Mystery Witch School. And the YouTube channel is called Mystical Witch School because at the time I was going to call it Mystical Witch School. So I'd set up the YouTube channel, and then somewhere along the line I changed it. So that's why there's 2 different names.
Sounds good. They could find you pretty easily though, because I just Googled your name and I found all of that. So, but thank you so much for coming on. This was really very interesting. I really appreciate you sharing your wealth of information and knowledge.
Well, once again, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed doing it. So, yeah,
great.
It's been fun.
We'll have you back again, I'm sure. So thank you all for listening in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a magical week.